JIT Larson.
Just in time.
Just in time Larson.
Great. Well, that might be everyone who's joining us tonight, and it's 7 o'clock, so we can go ahead and get started with a roll call to order and roll call.
Committee member Breeding doesn't seem to be here yet. Committee member Fasoon?
Here.
Committee member Larson?
Here.
Committee member Peterson?
Here.
Committee member Mira Venkatesh?
Here.
Vice Chair Merchant?
Here. And before we move on to approval of the minutes, the City Council last night adopted a resolution adding a land acknowledgement before all of our meetings. And we are the first council, commission, or committee in the city to get to read the land acknowledgement. So I'll read that now, and then we can proceed to the rest of the agenda. The City of Albany recognizes that we occupy the land originally protected by the Confederated Villages of Luzon. We acknowledge the genocide that took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt that is owed to this indigenous people, specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions, which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe and together build a better future for all that now make this their home. And now we will move on to approval of minutes from our last meeting. I know Lizzie had one note about them.
I will acknowledge that I said that the meeting was called to order by Chair Chen and it was called to order by Vice Chair Merchant. So I anticipate the committee wanting to make at least one minor edit. My apologies for my mistake.
Does anyone else have any comments on the minutes? I'm not seeing any hands. Would anyone like to make a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Great, thank you, Lizzie. Can we have a vote, please?
Yes. It looks like Committee member Breeding.
Aye.
Committee member Fasoon.
Aye.
Committee member Larson.
Yes.
Committee member Peterson.
Yes.
Committee member Mira Venkatesh.
Yes.
Vice Chair Merchant.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Great. Now is the time for any public comment for anybody who is attending who would like to address the committee with any items that are not currently on the agenda. I see we have one hand raised.
Yes. Right. Jeremiah?
Yeah, go ahead, shuttle bus, take a break. Yeah, hey, it's Jeremiah here. Just want to say that over here at the Port of Oakland, the ship exhaust is just terrible. Every time the ship starts up their engines to leave after it's been sitting here for 2 days or 3 days, just all this black smoke. It's just terrible. And you know, I would suggest, you know, if you guys want to go to Vessel Finder, vesselfinder.com. I have the app on my phone, but there's even a website you can do on your laptop or tablet. You don't have to download the app. Hold on. Yeah, go ahead. What are you doing right now? Giving the bus a break. Sorry. So basically, if you go on vesselfinder.com, you can see all the ships in the world. You can see every single container ship, every single tanker vessel, every single cruise ship, every single research vessel, every single ferry boat. And once you zoom out and you got the whole world in there, you start to see how many millions of these big, huge boats there are. And I think that's where a lot of this global warming is coming from, because they're burning raw bunker fuel, raw mineral oil right out of the ground. It's not even filtered. Every single ship is burning this mineral stuff, and it's just black. And it's terrible. And there's really not any shipping regulations. I mean, last year they had some cleaner fuel, but it's really not that clean. So if you go in Vessel Finder, you know, and look at all these ships, you know, sure, it's our cars, but the majority is just from shipping. All the Amazon orders, all the everything. So I was wondering if there was some incentive, you know, for people buying electric vehicles, or even trucks, you know, commercial vehicles going electric. You know, maybe these bridge tolls can be free for an electric car. You know, that way the consumer has some incentive to buy an electric vehicle, because at least you get free bridge tolls, or, you know, free carpool lane or something. Really love this commission. It's so fun. It's a hot topic. And
security, come back.
Yeah, so just check out all these ships in the world, Vessel Finder. There's a couple other apps, but
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, check it out. Get familiar. Thanks. Keep up the good work, everybody.
Thanks so much, Jeremiah. I don't see any other hands raised from the public, so we can move on to announcements.
We did just have one person join at the end of that comment, so I just want to.
Great, thank you. I'll give a moment if our new attendee would like to raise a hand, and we're receiving public comment for any items not on the agenda.
No hands raised.
Great, so we can move on to item number 4 on the agenda, announcements.
Great. Okay. Pull a couple things up. I have an announcement from Bayren. I'm going to read the blurb they provided. Looking to make energy upgrades at your business? Bayren Business makes it easy to install LED lighting, smart thermostats, HVAC controls, and more. Learn about Bayren program at a webinar on November 18th from noon to 12:30 p.m. That is available at bayren.org. We also today, thanks to Michelle, put a news item on our website with tips for sustainable shopping and gift wrapping this holiday season. As was previously mentioned in a public comment, the holidays can come with a lot of consumption and wrapping and shipping, and Michelle generously created a wonderful list with a beautiful graphic she made on her own to highlight ways you can be more sustainable this holiday season. So check that out on our city website under the news section. Stop Waste will be hosting upcoming induction cooking webinars during the months of November and December that highlight ways to cook your holiday meals and desserts on induction cooking. So keep an eye out for those. You can find them at stopwaste.org. And I also, again, on the note of sustainable consumption, wanted to promote the resource tool again, also available at stopwaste.org. If you are looking for ways to recycle your holiday lights, or if you're cleaning through things to make room for stuff, visit the resource tool, which will give you options for reuse and repurpose before it will tell you how to recycle items. That's all I have for sustainability events and resources at this time. I'll take a quick pause to see if we have any questions. Seeing none. We have an update. I'm sure this committee is well aware about East Bay Community Energy upcoming rate and electricity mix change. In June 2021, the Albany City Council voted to set the default electricity option for Albany customers to EBCE's Renewable 100 service starting January 1st, 2022. Renewable 100 costs an additional 1 cent per kilowatt hour above PG&E's standard rates. That's about $5 more per month for a typical Albany residential home, and that additional cost varies more widely for businesses based on the amount of power used. EBCE also offers their Bright Choice service, which is priced at 1% below PG&E rates and is approximately 5% more renewable energy than PG&E, although it is not carbon-free. Customers who prefer to power their home or business with Bright Choice are welcome to do so by visiting ebce.org/Albany and clicking on Choose Bright Choice, or by calling 1-833-699-3223. You can find all this information at ebce.org/Albany. Any questions on that item? Committee Member Peterson?
Yeah, are we still tracking what customer, do we know what percentage are on, have either opted out to PG&E or opted down, and are we still tracking that? It would be good to have that information.
EBCE tracks it. When we first rolled out the program in 2018, we got monthly updates, but I don't believe we have had an update recently because it's pretty stagnant. But I think you're right. I think it would be interesting to get an update. We can look into getting one of those for the committee.
Can we just plan on maybe put this on agenda? So once, and that would be in January, right? When it would start up. Probably wouldn't know till February, really.
We probably wouldn't know until the end of Q1, maybe, or the end of their first billing cycle. We could get a current estimate as soon as tomorrow, most likely. But yeah, if we want an accurate picture of what it is after the rate change takes effect, we would probably want to wait until after their first billing cycle conclude. Probably a month after the first billing cycle concludes,
right?
Because that would be when.
If we could just track that and then put a pin in the calendar, maybe put it on future items.
Mm-hmm. Committee Member Larson?
Yeah, did you say what kind of communication is going out about that? Are they doing like a mailer or something, or what?
There is going to be a mailer. We've been putting weekly notices in our e-news. There's information on that ebce.org/Albany. We've been posting stuff to social media, making announcements at public meetings. I believe there's actually going to be 2 mailers. So definitely trying to spread the word.
It's an EBCE mailer, right? So
yeah, it's coming from EBC.
They're putting some sort of hopefully positive spin on the Renewable 100.
I think it's pretty much the same messaging as what I just verbatim read. We have to, I think, legally alert the community that they can opt down and opt out. But yeah, I think it highlights how wonderful Renewable 100 is and that it's funding local energy generation projects.
Yes.
Committee Member Peterson?
Yeah, is it possible to include some sort of statement that's saying that this supports the Albany Climate Action and Adaptation Plan and brings Albany in more compliance with the emissions reductions that we are shooting for? I mean, I think, just to follow on with Eric's comment, I think as much as we can promote people being happy about it, the better. I mean, I know people react negatively when a decision is made for them and they have to then correct it when it wasn't quite what they wanted. And so I think letting people know why is really important.
We can do that.
Good comment. Thank you.
Also, Vice Chair Merchant, I see we have a member of the public.
Great, thank you. Yeah, could we please allow time for Jeremiah to speak?
Jeremiah?
I just want to start out by thanking you guys for your wonderful presentations, on your announcements. That's one of the reasons why I attend these meetings, because it's so informational and it's really fun. I really like that. I try to do announcements, during the SEJC Commission to let people know where things are. I think it's great that you do that. It's really neat. So I was wondering if we're doing any fun things in Albany, like the webinar is cool. I was thinking maybe something at the library or the, recreation center, somewhere in the lobby. Maybe we could do like one day a month on like, ways to be sustainable, have some, like a science fair, those triple fold stand-up cardboard things for a presentation, and have some things on ways to, recycle around the holidays like you were talking about. That way people could just see it every time they walk in the library or the recreation center. They could just see something, because this is one of the funnest commissions. This is such a hot topic. You know, it's really fun, and but it's all serious stuff at the same time, because this is all the air we breathe and the water we drink. You know, so I mean, there's only so much water on Earth. I mean, we're drinking the same water that dinosaurs drank and the air we breathe. So if we could figure out a way to get this water filtered and everything, you know, that'd be great. So yeah, keep up the good work, you guys, and I appreciate your announcements. Thanks.
Thanks so much. Did any of the other members of the public would anyone else like to give comments on the announcements? I don't see any other hands raised. Does that conclude the announcements, Lizzie? Okay, great. So we are ready to move on to agenda item number 5, the staff presentation on parking policies, which I believe is Jeff.
Yes, good evening, everybody. Jeff Baum, the Community Development Director. I'd like to, so the purpose of this presentation was to respond to various discussions that have come up both this committee and other committees and commissions about parking policies, and just to give you an opportunity, give us an opportunity to give you a little context of what we've done in recent years and what some of the different policy options are that the land use planning profession is kicking around, and then give you, of course, an opportunity to talk about it among yourselves. So what I'd like to do is share my screen for just a moment for a very brief presentation, PowerPoint presentation, and then we can get into the discussion. Bear with me just a second as I get this set up. There we go. Okay. So the city last looked at parking policies, and when I speak of parking, it's both, you know, looking at it globally, both the street parking, public parking, and private parking policies in our zoning code. We last looked at the street parking range of possibilities and analysis in the 2015 to 2017 timeframe. We received a grant from the Alameda County Transportation Commission to do a study. And so we started by collecting a lot of data on parking patterns in the city. I won't go into the details, although if we need to look at some of the details, I can show that to you. But we did parking surveys, or the consultant did parking surveys along the San Pablo Avenue and Solano Avenue corridors in particular. And I wanted to just give you a few of the highlights of their findings. First, as you can see on the screen, the typical occupancy rates on San Pablo Avenue, if the public parking, this is street parking, was in the range of 52 to 60% of the spaces were occupied, depending on whether it was a weekday or weekend, during the day or during the evening. Solano had a range of 42 to 61%. And so we'll come back to that, because I think that's important as we think about what sort of policy options we might want to consider in the future. The other thing that the consultant did is they had an Intercept interview where it was kind of talking to the person on the street about how they arrived at Solano, and this was on Solano Avenue. And as you can see again on the screen, 45% of the visitors to Solano Avenue came via bicycle, either walked, biked, or used transit. Of the people who drove, the remaining 55%, they parked, a third of them parked on nearby cross streets, essentially the residential streets nearby. And then a little bit more than half of the folks who arrived were able to park within 1 block of their destination. So there were a couple of things that came out of that. First of all, there are areas of the city where there is much higher parking occupancy rates, but they're very localized. And for example, this data was collected back when the Albany Theater was operating. So that 800 block of Stanage is a good example of a street that has higher parking occupancy than a lot of nearby streets, because for people who are driving to the theater, that's usually the first street they turn onto if they're looking for parking. Another street that frequently has high parking occupancy rates is Ordway up on the upper part of Solano Avenue in Albany. And that's a combination, I think, of both a relatively dense number of homes on that street, plus it's very close to Berkeley. So we get some of the overflow of people who are actually going to Berkeley, but they park in Albany because we don't have parking meters. But in general, those other ranges you saw are typical. A couple of other things that are important to point out as we talk about parking analysis. The first is enforcement is a real challenge for the city. It is not an easy position to hire someone to do. Right now, we tend to have typically have 1 to 2 parking enforcement people on the job at any particular time. And so as a program were to expand, the number of staff people that would be required would need to expand. And that, as I say, is a challenge to recruit people to do parking enforcement these days. And then the other important thing is some of the more conventional parking management programs that such as parking meters and residential parking permits, which are the 2 typical policy initiatives that cities take, were actually intended to make parking and driving easier. And it was so that if you live in an area where it's there's high demand for parking, you've got a chance to take your car to wherever you're going, come back and find a parking space nearby. And similarly, parking meters, same thing. They're intended to make sure that people don't spend too much time, any more time than necessary, parking in the commercial district. So as you talk about parking policies and programs, I think it's important to, particularly in light of this committee's mission and vision of addressing greenhouse gases, that some of those conventional parking programs are probably not consistent with the objective of reducing greenhouse gases. And this will be my final slide, then I'll stop the screen share. But I think it is an attempt to summarize kind of the menu of potential parking policies that the city might consider and to give you a little bit of a quick overview of their status. The first one is to change our zoning requirements for new development. And the traditional city zoning ordinance had a minimum parking requirement. This was for many, many decades of city planning. And that thinking is changing a lot. And these days, cities are talking about maximum parking requirements or no parking requirements, or in some cases, just specially targeted areas for more or less parking. So for example, affordable housing might have less required parking in some cities, or you may have less required parking in areas that are well served by transit. So the city last looked at our parking standards in 2017, and we can always revisit those if that would be something that ultimately the city council were to direct us to do. It's important to note that with new state laws, and the law in particular is called density bonus law, any future residential development has the ability essentially to receive waivers or exceptions to these requirements. So whatever they feel a developer feels is a constraint to the potential development of housing, they can and typically will ask for exceptions to that. And sometimes it's typically to request less parking than what the city might require. And in fact, I don't know, about 6 months ago, maybe 8 months ago, the city approved a project on Evelyn Street that did not have any required parking at all using the density bonus regulations. A few other things that are talked about in city parking policies, the idea of shared parking, that's something that our code currently allows and we encourage. There's also the concept of unbundling parking. So if you're renting an apartment, you don't automatically get a parking space. You would pay extra for that if you want it, or maybe you don't need it, or maybe you need 2 of them for whatever reason. So unbundling that allows the marketplace to kind of adjust to that and hopefully encourages people to think twice about having a second automobile or even a first automobile. And again, our zoning ordinance presently allows that for new development, residential development. A couple of other things, some cities, bigger cities that have parking structures and parking lots that they manage themselves. They'll sometimes take money from a development project rather than to require parking and use that money to help maintain the parking facilities that already exist. That's not applicable for us because we don't have any city managed parking facilities. And then finally, the concept of pricing parking, and idea there would be a famous book written by a professor at UCLA called the High Cost of Free Parking, is the idea that we charge parking to align supply and demand and use the revenues from that to do some neighborhood improvements and so forth. The problem and the challenge for us in Albany are those low occupancy rates that we see when we look at it citywide. So the conclusion of actually the 2017, this parking study that I was referencing was that the city council decided that the parking demand hadn't risen to the point of needing to or wanting to implement a parking management program. The last thing I'll mention here, and I think it's the one area that is important that we haven't paid attention to, and in many respects probably has the best opportunity to impact the climate-related goals and objectives, is transportation demand management, where we have programs. Typically, these are with employers, but they don't have to be. But there are programs where whether it's an employer or a landlord or something, provide at the very least transit passes and maybe van carpools or other kinds of ways of getting people and other incentives to get people to use alternatives to the single occupancy vehicle. So with that, I'm going to stop share and be happy to answer any questions that any of you might have, or listen to your discussion about what the city might want to do in the future.
Great, thank you so much, Jeff. Yeah, does anyone have any questions? See, Committee Member Peterson?
Yeah, so 17 wasn't that long ago, but 15 is getting pretty long ago, 6 years. Has the city usually, well, it's kind of interesting to hear that we have a surplus of parking, because it seems like at every planning commission meeting about some project, the big issue is always parking, and there isn't enough parking, and parking's crowded, and everyone's complaining about parking. So it's always very shocking to hear the city say, well, there's a surplus of parking, so there's no need to regulate it. I'd be interested to hear your comments on that. And then you highlighted a very good point, which is the parking policy has really been adopted, free parking, to have as much, unlimited restrictions on driving a vehicle and parking a vehicle in Albany as much as possible. And I've even heard people say, we're really proud of that, free parking in Albany. And that goes completely contrary to what we're trying to do in moving away from having cars sort of rule everything, from the safety of pedestrians and bicyclists to just polluting the air significantly. Even if we shifted to 100% EVs roaring around, you still have the safety issues. So I'm wondering, is the city looking to reassess sort of that overarching kind of approach to parking in the city, not just looking at it from the point of view of, can people park their car and drive their car around easily?
I think that is something that ultimately we do have to do. It's in the climate action plan. I think it's a medium-term objective, if I remember correctly, or a medium-term action is to evaluate parking policies. So I think that's something to do absolutely in the future. But the challenge, you're absolutely right. And getting back to your first point and question, there is an interesting dynamic that people are very sensitive to parking and the distance that they perceive they have to walk in order to get to their parking spaces. And when you look at the data, it's typically not that bad. This data is now 6 years old, although my experience, we do parking surveys all the time for people who are asking for parking exceptions. We will often do a parking survey. And generally kind of, again, with some exceptions in high volume areas, the occupancy rates are generally around 60%. If you average it over two or three different days and different times and so forth. So it's not as bad as in a lot of other cities. If you perceive, good and bad being, good is there's plenty of parking to park my car. We're good. The point you're making is that may not be so good from a climate perspective, and that is going to be a major change in societal thinking about transportation that is beyond the scope of maybe just this committee, but it's got to start somewhere, right? I don't know if did I answer.
No, that's fine. I didn't want to get into when we get to the comment part. I have no more questions on that.
Committee Member Larson.
Can you explain the transport demand management a little bit more? I'm not familiar with that. So
yeah, it's a poorly labeled policy and program. It's basically to get people, again, it tends to be more effective with employers, to require employers to have like a big, say a hospital or something. You can see the Kaiser vans traveling around Oakland, back and forth to a BART station. Organized carpools, the transit passes or employee incentive programs, I forget what they're called, where you can get your transit passes paid for tax-free. Those kinds of things are helpful to get people to think about alternatives. And it goes by the name of transportation demand management, but it's basically employer incentives for alternatives to driving.
And are those benefits that employers just provide, or is there some like incentive from government entities to create those?
So we don't really get them here in Albany, but if we had a large business park or something like that, it would be common that a city would require the businesses in that business park to have these programs in place.
Okay, thanks.
Committee Member Peterson.
Just to follow up on that, with the larger developments that are coming in along San Pablo Avenue, are those transportation management approaches something that can be required of developers to actually provide tenants with certain mitigations to transit expenses, especially the low income component? Is that something we can do as a city or part of planning requirements?
That's what I would like to work on to improve. Right now, we have an old program on the books, and it's really more oriented to large employers, and we don't have large private employers to speak of. So I'd like to work on that so that, yeah, we could have those as requirements. They're far more effective on the employment side of the commute trip than they would be on the residential side. But perhaps a shuttle from a big project or a series of projects to a BART station might turn out to be feasible. The Emory go-around, just to elaborate a little bit, the Emory go-around system is the mega transportation demand management, because basically in Emeryville, businesses have to pay into a special tax that funds that. And in lieu of having to pay for, they do provide some parking, but there are lower parking requirements and there are lower roadway improvement requirements and so forth that have, and in turn, they've been able to fund what's, I think, been a really successful transit program there through essentially a transportation demand management program.
If nobody has any more questions, we can open it up to members of the public for questions before we move on to a discussion. I see one hand raised.
Jeremiah?
Yeah, hi.
Thank you very much. I just want to say thank you, Jeff, for your wonderful presentation on all your information. To speak on the last thing we were talking about was, I think a good solution would be on Solano or San Pablo, we could offer free parking for electric vehicles, right? So that way people start seeing electric vehicles, oh, free parking for electric vehicles. If we put meters on Solano, free parking for electric, 100% electric, not hybrids, but 100% electric. And then if you don't have an electric vehicle, then, you might have to pay 50 cents per hour or whatever. I don't know, Jeff, if you have the data from Aleda. You remember when Aleda was working? I did some work with her, some volunteer work. One of my first things I did with the city, I went around on San Pablo. She gave me one of those roller measuring things. And so what is it, 18 feet, Jeff, or 16 feet? I think every parking space is 16 or 18 feet. But the city had no information on San Pablo because they weren't striped. Parking spaces weren't striped. I don't know if they are now. Maybe the parking spaces are striped on San Pablo. But anyway, the point of that was to count parking spaces because the goal was to get parking meters, right? So we're trying to collect data on how many parking spaces there are on San Pablo. And there was a number because they go every 18 feet or every 16 feet. And then how many parking spaces are on Solano. And we did parking meters, hypothetically, how much money would that generate for the city, and so on and so forth. Some people shot it down because, free parking in Albany, right? Okay, so that's okay. There's pros and cons to everything in life. But I think a good way to do this is offer that electric car incentive thing first. If we're going to do it for residents on residential, I know on Cornell between Solano and Marin, every parking space is booked for a resident. I know all these streets all the parking is booked. So if we do residential parking, hey, maybe a good idea could be the parking space in front of your house. You could pay a city permit to where that's your parking space, for when you get home from work after 5 p.m. So it's public between 9 to 5, right in front of your house. This is a public free parking Albany, but maybe it's permitted for certain hours. So when you get home, you have a parking space in front of your house. Hey, okay. All right. Keep up the good work, guys.
I see one more hand raised.
David?
Okay. Just a question. The horse track, gathers a lot of people. Do they currently have shuttles running between BART and the track? Just there's an opportunity for maybe a shuttle service. That's it.
There are no other members of the public with their hand raised.
So we can now move on to a discussion of what we might like to do as a committee in response to Jeff's presentation. Commissioner Peterson?
Yeah, I was kind of curious, Jeff, did you want to address any of those questions that were raised by the two public members?
With respect to the second speaker, with respect to Golden Gate Fields, I believe there's a shuttle. To be honest, I don't know exactly where it goes, but I assume it goes between the track and the BART station. With respect to the first speaker with Jeremiah, I think the idea of reserving parking spaces for electric vehicles, say, I think that is a complicated issue, both from an enforcement perspective and equity perspective. At least right now, electric vehicle ownership tends to be the wealthier part of our society, and I wouldn't want to promote a policy that kind of has two different standards of parking, where there's really a substantial income differentiation of the beneficiaries from that. So that would be that would be a policy issue, obviously, ultimately to resolve. But I just point that out that might be a concern.
Committee Member Peterson.
Well, I'll kick off some discussions things. I know I've brought up the issue of some kind of parking management strategy. And when I originally was thinking of it, Albany really has no way to influence what kind of vehicle people have, how many vehicles they have, how much they drive them, any of this. And here we've got, transportation pollution accounting for over half of our emissions. You implement a parking management plan, and maybe you have some kind of methodologies to at least impact that a little by having people make a decision between how many cars they have, what kind of cars they have, and whether they're willing to pay to park them on the street. It's a real blunt, crude tool, but it's better than no tool, it seems like sometimes. And there might be a way to actually implement a pilot around that concept with the rollout of these larger developments along San Pablo, because I attended a lot of the public comment sessions, and all the people that lived up and down Adams Street, biggest complaint was they're going to lose their street parking, because with the unbundled parking, people are going to say, why pay, $800 a month for a parking spot when you can park on the street for free, even though it's a bit of hassle and you have to drive around a bit. So the idea would be to have area designated parking like Berkeley has, where you needed a certain permit to park in that area. And those that lived in certain large scale developments that had provided garage parking would not be able to get those permits, or would be largely restricted from getting those permits. So anyway, I don't know how you work it out, but at least there's some methodology to try to make the policy of limiting parking encourage people to look at other avenues. And right now, we have no influence on that. It's wide open. I know people that have 7 or 8 cars. They park them all over the place. There's some guy I've seen near the Gabriel Triangle. He has all these, vintage cars covered in bags lying all over the street. I mean, okay, they're places and they're open and people can park, but it's just anything goes, any gross polluter, anything you want, it doesn't matter. And so it seems like having some sort of management policy you could start to tailor in certain requirements and incentives that would make some people, and again, the equity issue is maybe an issue. But I mean, if we do nothing, then nothing happens, and we have no methodology whatsoever to impact how people transport themselves at all, period. And so I just think, there could be some creative ways of at least doing pilot projects to see if parking management can impact, people's decisions on non-polluting transportation.
I guess a question I have is, how do we decide if that's within the scope of our committee, or if it's better for the Transportation Commission to handle this type of issue? I can see the angle you're coming at this from, Nick, where you're saying that we're trying to impact the types of cars that people drive and whether they drive at all. But I guess that's just kind of a question of like what's within the scope of our authority and who's best positioned within the city to address this.
If I may attempt to answer that question, I think it's a complicated issue. So certainly the Transportation Commission would be interested in that. And for the public right of way, the street city-owned right of way in the streets, but also the Planning and Zoning Commission if we're regulating future development. Another related aspect to this is maybe being a little bit more targeted about where we take out parking, and we're doing that from time to time. We'll be talking about that again soon in the Transportation Commission about looking at removing street parking some places to create room for bicycle facilities. So it may not be a coming at the transportation choice directly, but by trying to create a facility that's an alternative, we would be reducing the supply of parking and also giving people a safe, hopefully low stress way to bicycle. And along those lines, also improving our sidewalks so it's more comfortable for people who have particularly mobility challenges for them to walk on city streets.
Committee Member Peterson?
Yeah, I don't want to hog the space, so please, other people, we really want to hear your comments. I mean, anything's good. Just to respond to Vice Chair Merchant's, who has the authority and who needs it. I really think, as a Climate Action Committee member and seeing that we're trying to implement the Climate Action Adaptation Plan, we're involved in everything and we're pushing this. And it's our purvey to make sure that every aspect of how the city operates improves our ability to meet the goals of the Climate Action Adaptation Plan. That is totally within our purview. We're not stepping on toes to suggest that maybe a parking policy would be a way to implement methodologies for limiting emissions. Everything's on the table. I mean, we're in a crisis. I mean, the world's burning up. So I think, we certainly want to collaborate and do that. We're not going to circumvent other people's input on it, but I think it's up to us to sort of drive the discussion and push people outside. I mean, as you've just heard, Jeff said, we have a whole sort of culture here now of people who complain mercilessly about not having enough parking if they can't park in front of their home. There may be a parking spot 50 feet down the street, but that's not good enough. So how do you change a society that has that point of view when they've got to get out of their cars and start doing other things? So I would argue, this idea of coming up with pilot projects, we're not going to radically change it. And that's the other thing is we've got to implement these programs in steps that are palatable with communication, with explanation. Nobody's going to like them because we're changing from a very energy intensive lifestyle we've all grown accustomed to that's polluting the earth to something that's less energy intensive that requires us to do more. And nobody wants to do that. So I think this particular committee needs to really push the envelope on that and come up with as many creative and out of the box viable solutions. And I see a lot of them having to do with aspects that touch on everything. Jeff mentioned the planning. That's really going well. We have this large new development coming in. They're doing half a parking space per unit. No one has a half car, but they have a ton of parking, including cargo bike parking. So hopefully that influences the new tenants and there will be tenants there that want that. But if you just don't do anything to reinforce it, if you just let them park willy-nilly all over the city, it isn't going to work very well. And in fact, everybody's going to hate it and they'll say, see, it didn't work because now they're all parking all over the place. And we had no policy or even a pilot to address maybe there's a way to reinforce that. So I think we really have to think about all sorts of options and not think the old way and not look back at, well, can everyone drive their car everywhere they want? I think that's our job.
Committee Member Larson?
I was trying to figure out how to pick myself up off the mat there from the introduction there, because I agree with Jeremiah that I think that it's practical to think that we could get people to transition to electric cars. I don't think it's practical to think that we can get people to give up cars, period, right now. I mean, yes, that's our end goal, but I think transitioning to electric, to alternatives, I think that's a good movement. But Jeff, you're absolutely right. I mean, the city's resources for parking enforcement is limited, and then you threw in can't even hire people to do that now. I'm like, oh wow, that's that's another added, problem that I hadn't even thought of. But yeah, I think I agree. We got to find a way to, and I would be very much in favor of finding ways to promote or move people to electric vehicles at least. There's so much free parking. It's just, I agree with Nick. It's just like, it's kind of obscene that we, in this day and age, have free parking everywhere. It's just like, yeah, come on, drive over to Albany. And it's a very business friendly environment. And that's the way Albany always has been. And we like Solano Avenue, we like the city for that. But yeah, so I don't really have a good proposal myself, but I just wanted to reinforce that, yes, I would be behind, trying to do some pilots that encourage electric vehicle parking, advantageous rates or convenience or something like that. It's a pickle though.
Well, what do you all think would be the best way as a committee if we have interest in going about exploring what possible options we might have here that we might want to investigate? We already have a number of subcommittees going on right now. Is this something that we would maybe want to create a current subcommittee for, or keep it on our agenda for creating a future subcommittee when we have capacity? I'm just putting up for discussion how we'd like to proceed.
Sure.
If I may, Chair Merchant, in terms of our staff capacity right now, we're going to be a little thin for a few months.
Yeah.
So I'd rather not make a commitment to starting a major new initiative like this until we get some of the other things that we've got already going, particularly some of our planning projects completed in the next, hopefully 4 or 5 months.
Great.
So
helpful.
It's good to start to talk about it and think about it. And I'm happy to be here tonight to talk about this, but we just need a little bit of breathing room for what we've got going already.
Okay. Committee Member Peterson?
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, we powered through a few things pretty recently, but so Jeff, I have a question though. Committee members could, without involving staff participation, we could start putting together some ideas on this. But I just want to get an idea of, and I would be thinking more in terms of like a pilot project, and then we would, again, possibly use DD funds or something like that. But I know parking is this really, it's this hot potato issue, and everybody really cringes when it's brought up. But do you think, and again, what I want to do is strategize with staff on a constructive way of looking at this and kicking some ideas around and maybe doing a pilot or at least a outreach effort to get community input. Is that something that you think would be beneficial?
Is that a question for Jeff or for the committee?
Well, I no, that was a question for Jeff, but if the committee has thoughts on it too, I'd love to hear it.
I mean, I'd love to hear from the rest of the committee if we think, we have a lot of different priorities and a lot of different ways we're trying to move things forward and meeting the CAP objectives. So maybe, I don't know if it's a discussion for tonight, but something to think about is whether this is something that we want to be focusing our attention and resources on. And I'd just love some input from the rest of the committee members on thoughts around that.
I can just quickly add too that when we went through the exercise of creating the work plan that went to council, this item was listed specifically as, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was listed at the bottom as potential items based on time. So that's just something for the committee to consider, that this wasn't expressly designated to the committee by council for this work plan cycle. Or it was based on time. And so it's a question of how are we doing on timing with the other things listed in the work plan?
Committee Member Mira Venkatesha, we've got a hand raised. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I fully agree that we should probably focus on the projects we're currently attached to. And then maybe if collaboration with the transportation subcommittee is a possibility down the line, then maybe sort of adding this to their plate could be a potential way to take it forward. But maybe I think we're all sort of at capacity, as you mentioned, and we want to execute on what we have currently.
Commissioner Peterson?
So I'd like to make a suggestion, because I think there's a big opportunity here to have something that will work for, city, various groups, and looking forward to denser development in Albany. And I think what we should do is kind of table this, but tie it to the large development that's going to be happening at the Albany Bowl site, which I'm not sure what the time frame is, but as that gets nearer to realization, and starts to get into construction, look at developing a pilot parking management project that would be in response to the concerns that the citizens along Adams Street have, and that maybe there could be a very limited sort of area kind of test of how does this work? Does it, and that would give us an opportunity to do something very, defined and tied to a specific concern and need, but also, be able to evaluate some of those other concerns about staffing, cost, blah, 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 and all that. I think it's just something that we could benefit from sooner rather than later. I mean, parking management is something that you're going to have to introduce very early, convince people over a series of years until it becomes something that would be of an effect that would garner anything that would meet the climate action and adaptation plan goals. So it's one of those things where, yeah, we have it down as a low thing, but I think people think of that in terms of it's going into effect tomorrow, when this is something that's going to take years to get implemented. And if this baby step could happen, I think we want to keep tracking that.
Just to add to what Lizzie said, it's listed under a potential future work plan item to research feasibility and emission reduction impact of implementing a parking management strategy. So I would say that it's not even within our current listed.
Yeah, but I'm talking a pilot project around a specific area with a specific development. So I guess my request is that Jeff could come back and possibly discuss that with the Climate Action Committee as the Albany Bowl project nears more, we get a better picture of how that works, and that it becomes something that traffic and planning can work together on with climate action. That there might be a good opportunity to do a test case there or a pilot project.
Lizzie, what would be the best way for us to collectively decide on whether this is something we would like to ask of city staff? Can we put a vote of that? I'm trying to procedurally, just wondering.
As awkward as this is to say, I don't think the committee has a role in telling us as city staff to develop this. It would be a council directive to the city manager to tell us to do this. So if it were to go up the chain, it would be the committee telling council to tell us to do this, at which time I don't think this is really listed in the purview. I don't think that would work well.
And if I can add to what Lizzie said, some of these things we just do as a natural part of our job. So when that project comes along, we will be very interested to see how a lot of things about it function, including the parking arrangements. And we'll be doing parking surveys. We'll be doing, very curious about who's living there, right? And what brought them to Albany and so forth. So some of this we don't really don't need direction from the committee to explore. If and when you do want to get into the specifics of a parking pilot project, we probably should agendize that for that particular neighborhood. I think there are real pros and cons to it, to be honest with you. I think there are some things about it that sound good that aren't that good once it is executed. So that's a different discussion than what's on your agenda for tonight. And when it's appropriate, and again, with respect to Committee Member Peterson's suggestion is that project comes to fruition, and comes out of the ground, then yes, I could imagine us coming back and exploring that more. So.
I want to be sensitive to the fact that we do have a member of the public with a hand raised. Yeah, Committee Member Peterson, if you'd like to finish a thought on this.
Yeah, no, I trust that Jeff will bring it back. We've expressed, at least I've expressed that, we're very interested in this. Again, especially with COP26 just finishing up and everything being way behind, this sort of kick the can down the road approach, it's resulted in us being in really deep mess. And I just think we need to keep thinking and pushing the envelope as much as we can. But I appreciate that we have our limits. I'm not saying we do a lot now. I'm just thinking that we try to implement some little steps around this, because I would be interested in, again, this comes back to the long range, sort of how are we achieving the climate action adaptation plan goals from the point of view of staff efforts and, total from now till then, what is being done to reduce transportation emissions in Albany that staff's working on right now? If, we're going to give up any sort of parking management as an aspect of doing that. I mean, it's just trying to get ideas out there that seem to address that issue. Other than we just hope everybody eventually does it.
Okay, well, I think we've had a chance to hear from everyone on the committee who has wanted to weigh in on this. We do have a member of the public with a hand raised, so if we could allow David to speak.
David?
Just wondering, do we collect any kind of parking tax from Golden Gate Fields? And if not, I just wondered, maybe we should think about that. And, if they generate a bunch of car trips through our city and subject us to pollution, maybe some incremental piece of their parking that they charge, we could get a little bit for ourselves and then use that for our climate change program. Maybe spend some money to, put panels on our buildings and et cetera, all the things that we need money for. Maybe it can come from that. I don't know legally, how do we go about doing a tax on that? But you go to San Francisco and you stay in a hotel, you pay a hotel tax, and all that kind of stuff. So just thought of that. So that's it. Thanks. Bye.
Great. Thank you, David. I don't see any other hands raised. And I believe that, so this was just under the presentations items on the agenda. And so there's no action for us to take on this right now. But Jeff, thank you so much for presenting on that. I know it's been on our list of things to receive information on for a while. So we appreciate your time.
You're welcome. I appreciate the chance to do it.
So I think we're ready to move on to item number 6 on the agenda, which is the 6.6-1, which is the staff presentation on local hazard mitigation and adaptation planning.
Yes. I will give that presentation, and I think I'll keep it somewhat quick. I'll note that this was requested by Chair Chen, and unfortunately he's unable to join us this evening. So perhaps he will want to watch the recording and suggest another future presentation if it didn't cover what he was looking for. Can you all see my screen with 2 plans? Great. So I'm going to give a brief introduction. As I mentioned, Chair Chen requested that we do a staff presentation on our efforts to do local hazard and climate adaptation planning at the City of Albany. As you'll see on my screen, I have the front page, cover pages of two major planning documents we have in the City of Albany. As you are all very familiar with, the City of Albany Climate Action and Adaptation Plan on my left. And then for those of you who were on the Sustainability Committee before it was a Climate Action Committee, this was before I was even there, so it might just be Committee Member Peterson. The city has a local hazard mitigation plan that was adopted by council in 2018, and it extends through the end of 2022. These are our two primary planning documents that address local hazard planning and adaptation planning. I will note that the city does have other plans that address similar elements, but I thought these two would be the most relevant to this committee at this time. So the local hazard mitigation plan, for it to be helpful, because there are a lot of ways to describe hazards and mitigation. Hazard mitigation, as it's defined in local hazard mitigation planning, is a way to reduce or alleviate loss of life, personal injury, and property damage that can result from a disaster through long and short-term strategies. The local hazard mitigation plan, often abbreviated as LHMP, identifies these local hazards that Albany is most prone to. I guess I would say it assesses the vulnerability to those hazards and then identifies specific actions that can be taken to mitigate the risk, both mitigate that disaster from happening if possible, or if it's not possible to mitigate such a disaster, to mitigate the risk of the vulnerability in the city. And the way we implement the local hazard mitigation plan is through planning, programming, projects, and then also community outreach and engagement is a large component. The reason we have this local hazard mitigation plan is because we are required to, in addition to wanting to, the Federal Disaster Mitigation Act requires local governments to develop local hazard mitigation plans, and also by having a local hazard mitigation plan, we are eligible for reimbursement by FEMA if we are to undergo a disaster and need reimbursement of costs expended during that disaster. I think a good example of that is the COVID-19 crisis. Most staff time dedicated towards COVID-19 response, particularly in the beginning, we could claim reimbursement for from FEMA. Our local hazard mitigation plan, like I mentioned, was adopted by council on January 8th of 2018. Then it went through an approval process by CalOSHA, the Office of Emergency Services, and then by FEMA in August of 2018. The potential hazards identified in the local hazard mitigation plan, it's not all hazards our community could face, but at the time the plan was being developed, these were the hazards identified by the community and stakeholders and sector experts as being those that were most likely to occur in Albany. Ironically, public health epidemic was the last chapter in our local hazard mitigation plan, and it is the hazard that we are currently still living. So it's interesting that it just snuck its way in there. I think when we do our update to the local hazard mitigation plan next year, you will definitely see a more robust chapter on public health epidemics. I apologize, I'm moving my little Zoom screen around. The hazard mitigation plan was developed and is implemented in partnership, not just with City of Albany, different departments within the City of Albany, but also public and private utilities and other public agencies in the region and the state. And as far as implementation goes, we have annual review of measures, although I'll say that this year we were actively implementing most of our disaster response planning efforts throughout the year, but we did conduct annual review of the measures and will continue to do that. For our climate action and adaptation plan, I'm not going to spend a ton of time diving into this one because I think everyone on this call is pretty familiar with the CAP. The fourth chapter of the CAP is titled Accelerate Resilience, And all the bullet points you see on this slide are the subcategories that then categorize different actions and measures we committed to taking as a part of the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan. There's a large focus on green infrastructure, grid resilience, and restoring natural landscapes so that they are more resilient to some of the hazards we may face, such as wildfire. Additional resources that the city taps into and promotes to all the community is signing up for AC Alert. If you haven't signed up for AC Alert yet, I encourage you to do so. It's the countywide system that allows us to send notifications to phones and emails in the event of the emergency with pertinent information. And that software continues to be developed and enhanced. So I encourage you all to sign up for that. I know I'm signed up for AC Alert, and then all other alerts in areas where I frequently visit. So I encourage you to do the same. We typically promote a lot of countywide and regional resources because there are many agencies out there dedicated to disaster response and disaster planning, and we don't always want to reinvent the wheel. So we'll promote resources already available, such as those through the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, or those through Alameda County Department of Public Health or different Alameda County agencies. We also have, through our fire and emergency services within the city, there's a large focus on preparing the community for a disaster, both through volunteer efforts with the community emergency response team, and then outreach, encouraging our community members to prepare for disasters. We open cooling centers and extreme heat events. There's information about that on our website. And our neighborhood services department continues to expand services available to the community. We also, which this isn't totally in line with hazard mitigation planning, but I'll note that we do at the City of Albany and most public agencies in California, staff are trained disaster service workers, and we're trained to operate an emergency operations center to respond to disasters after they occur. Our emergency operations center was, what would you say, opened or began operating last March at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. So we did open up our command system to respond to that. And then also I wanted to put a plug here. I don't think we need to dive into a deep discussion of this tonight, but a lot of communities are looking into ways through special revenue funds, such as for us, Measure DD funds, how we can help those most vulnerable in our communities prepare to adapt to climate change and be prepared for natural disasters that may be a result of climate change. So I know that in some communities, the city has used revenue to purchase HEPA air purifiers to give to low-income residents who maybe live in older housing stock. That is, it's more difficult to keep wildfire smoke out. And that is something that I think this committee could definitely explore, if not tonight, at a future meeting to discuss how we can use some Measure DD funds to maybe put a focus on adaptation, particularly for those most vulnerable in our community. Those were all the slides I prepared for this evening. At this time, I'll take any questions you may have. No questions? I answered all of it.
I do see a member of the public who has a question.
All right, we can go to public comment. Jeremiah?
Yeah, hey, sorry about that. Yeah, this is so great. You know what? I'm fine. I'm good. Sorry about that. Everything you said was great. I just want to say I agree with everything.
Right. No other members of the public with their hands raised.
So now we can open it up for a discussion. I will note that we do have, this is on our work plan this specific item, resilience planning. So if this is an appropriate time, if we want to respond to anything that Lizzie has presented to discuss how any actions we might want to take, now would be the right time to discuss that. Committee Member Peterson?
I'll just add a little bit of knowledge I have, since I got pretty strongly involved in Albany CERT and working with the fire department and the people that were running the CERT training. And during COVID, CERT training, of course, wasn't happening, and is now shifted to kind of a hybrid. They're working to bring it back, and the community Albany CERT group is pushing pretty hard to make sure that it comes back in in-person training when it's safe to do so. They've got to sign up to do it, but it isn't clear exactly if that would just be more than a training session rather than a full class part. You can do CERT training online through FEMA and through, I think, a California organization also. But it's much better if you bring people in together and you get much more of a community experience. Been very successful on that. The organization of a real CERT community effort involves getting quite a few block captains signed up and things like that. And the fire department has, as of a couple months ago or a month or so ago, requested that the Albany CERT Inc. nonprofit group take that on. So we're working to try to increase the number of people signed up as block captains. And I think there's a real overlap and advantage here for climate action adaptation work, in that you can develop a way of getting information out to the community other than just, emails and whatever. You can actually contact these block captains and they can disseminate information. Of course, it should only be really critical information, of which, addressing climate change would be. But anyway, that becomes a way for Albany City to become more informed and more aware of kind of what's going on. And hopefully we're going to start doing an effort to, seems like most of the people that are block captains involved in CERT are in the single family areas. We don't really have anyone in the multi-family locations. So we're going to try to encourage that happening. But anyway, there is work going on, and I think it has a good potential to help efforts of this committee too.
That also reminded me, thank you, Committee Member Peterson, I believe Community Climate Solutions either is rolling out or has rolled out a new section on all their platforms about disaster preparedness and resilience. And that's potentially a good opportunity for engagement through CERT, Committee Member Peterson, if you see that as an opportunity. It'd be cool to cross-collaborate between the work that the Outreach and Engagement Subcommittee is doing and what CERT is doing.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, that's more of a reason to at least getting people who are interested in emergency preparedness also involved in that. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I guess I should have asked this as a question, but Lizzie, how much would it cost if we were to potentially do a program to buy HEPA air filters for low-income people in the community that we could give to them if we have other smoke events?
So to be honest, I haven't done a ton of looking into the program, what other cities have done, but based on my knowledge of how much air purifiers cost, if we set aside a few $1,000s, I think that would go a long way. We would just want to maybe do some work on the back end to see how we want to identify the folks that we're making them available to, and then based on that, what the number we think we might need of air purifiers, and multiply that by maybe $100 to $150. So I think it's a way to make our, not a small portion, but a significant portion of Measure DD funds stretch in a very meaningful way, I think. So just wanted to put out the feelers for that. If that is something the committee is interested in, I'd be more than happy to continue looking into that program or the programs other cities have implemented, and provide some more information on that, maybe for January or February.
Great. Could we get some input from some of the members of the committee on whether this is something that we would potentially want to ask the city council to allocate Measure DD funds toward? And then Lizzie could look into it. Committeemember Peterson?
Yeah, I would also, Measure DD talked about having or requested that the city council endeavor to have 2/3 of the raised fund, 1/3 of the raised funds go for climate action adaptation efforts, but the other 2/3 talked about emergency preparedness, seniors issues, all this. So I think all DD funds are available for this effort. So it wouldn't be as if doing some adaptation effort would take away from climate action effort, mitigation effort. So that if any on the committee had a concern that, no, we want to just save that money for one use, the more 2/3 is actually in this category or in this request from the voters that it would be used for specifically that kind of effort. Oh, and I would think it'd be a great idea.
So I can plan to bring something back. I doubt I'd be able to do it for December, but for January or February, perhaps. Maybe I can outline a few different programs that other communities have used special revenues to fund.
Sounds great. Thanks so much, Lizzie.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I think that concludes, there's no other action required on that one, I believe. So that concludes 6.1 on the agenda. Moving on to 6.2, this is our update on multifamily electric vehicle charging pilot program.
Good evening. I'll be sharing with the CAC this presentation. So right now, I believe you see the agenda. Do you now see instead the slide on the screen?
Yes.
Great, thank you. So I have been working with Michelle on helping develop the focus group plan that will help us kick off the multifamily EV charging pilot that the CAC sent to council in September and they approved in October. So just for some background on this, our climate action and adaptation plan requires mass EV adoption for our carbon neutral goals set for 2045, in which 98% of passenger vehicles and 90% of commercial would need to be electric. To be able to reach that goal, it is a prerequisite that we have widely available EV charging infrastructure. And the most common place that EVs are charged are at home. However, renter households are more cost burdened and have less access to charging capacity, as well as less capability to install it, even should they have the funds. So the subcommittee met this summer, developed a program proposal, and council approved that pilot program in October. For the program overview as outlined by the pilot proposal, we have set aside $50,000 that would be allocated in grants of up to $15,000 per property for a maximum of 3 properties of 8 to 20 units, which is moving on, sorry. So staff will help property owners determine the proper infrastructure need after they've applied and have been selected, including whether their properties are feasible for installation. And one of the goals of the pilot is to provide information on tenant charging demand and opportunities to support greater electrification efforts in Albany. Focus groups will be held prior to the application and approval with both property owners and with tenants to help tailor the application to ensure that funds go to have the greatest impact and access with the ultimate goal that we lower barriers to EV adoption and we make more equitable climate action in Albany so that more households of all incomes have access to greener technologies. So with that, I'll move into the plan for the tenant focus group. This will be held first with the aim of identifying existing latent demand for EV charging amongst multifamily tenants, ideally either those who do have EVs or who are considering EVs or whom could be persuaded to get one should this opportunity for EV charging at home exist. We will conduct outreach to identify the focus group via social media, particularly on Nextdoor, though all platforms are up for consideration on our Big Belly waste bins, and also targeted communication to tenant and condo organizations. There is a detailed list of questions in the memo circulated for this agenda item, but we would be asking questions such as the current number of vehicles and typical use, whether tenants of these properties have access to charging at home, or if they also would have access at other destinations, such as work or school, what their likely vehicle replacement timeline may look like, current parking conditions. That could include whether they park on street, off street, if their spots in a garage or lot are reserved, so they always are assigned to the same spot, or whether it is free to park wherever there's availability, knowledge of cost rebates, along with knowledge of pricing for charging, the general interest in electric vehicles, impact of charging availability on the decision to purchase electric vehicles, if having the installation of either a level 1 versus a level 2 charger would change the decision-making for these families, the importance of the electricity pricing on decision-making, and then any other concerns or fears about EVs, charging, etc. This is not meant to be just an information gathering session, but also or that follows these strict questions, but more rather a conversation so that we are able to really meaningfully engage tenants to understand what about the program proposal as exists would work or would not for them. The property owner focus group would take what we learned from the tenant focus group to be able to help, hopefully, show that this demand for EV charging infrastructure exists, and to help understand property owner situations, considerations, and interest in this program. The outreach will be conducted on social media through targeted mailers using assessor data to identify eligible properties, and to APRA, Albany Property Rights Advocates, and a local organization predominantly composed of local landlords. Here's a similar list of questions targeted toward the property owners that staff would use to help identify how best to tailor the application. We would want to understand existing parking conditions, if the spaces are covered, uncovered, assigned, or not. If there's any existing expressed demand for charging from tenants, if any of the landlords have knowledge of tenant driving parking habits, what their familiarity with the installation process is, if they already have a contractor they know who could perform this, if they have the physical capacity or limitations that would either allow for or prohibit level 2 charging infrastructure in their property, the number and type of chargers desired, site suitability, economic considerations with charging, meaning would the landlord only be doing this if it's something off of which they could make a profit through charging for this, or if they're looking for something that's either cost neutral or in fact to operate this at a loss but have it as a tenant demand or as an amenity to attract tenants. the likely payment structure for installed chargers, as well as finally understanding concern about process and logistics. So we have prepared this for discussion. The only recommendation is to provide feedback to staff at this time. And with that, we can open this up to any questions you have for me or the rest of the team. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Johnny. Do any members of the committee have any questions? I guess I'll start. One that I had is how, and maybe this is for all city staff, how likely are we to get tenants to participate in a focus group like this? If, do we need to provide any sort of incentives other than just sort of like pitching in and giving their feedback?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer for sure. I don't think we do a lot of things that are very similar to this. But we do have some extra budget. We've got an extra 5,000 of kind of cushion money that could potentially be used for some sort of incentive. So that's something we could consider.
Great, because the questions that you came up with sound really great, and I think this would be really helpful information to know. We just need meaningful participation to actually get enough enough people to show up for it. Committee Member Larson?
Yeah, on the landlord side, part of our proposal was to make sure that the landlords had some skin in the game in doing this. This is not just the city providing everything for them. So is there anything built into the, I don't want to scare them off in the beginning, but is there anything built in to kind of evaluate like where that balance point is for them? Like how much incentive do they need? We want to try to make as much commitment by the landlords as possible, and spread our money as much as possible. Is that built into this initial questions?
I do believe it is. My understanding is that the expected capital outlay is greater than the grants that we would be providing. And however, yes, one of the considerations or questions we'll be seeking to answer is what sort of stake or skin in the game the landlords either have an interest in or have the financial means of contributing. Often, though, property owners of buildings this size in our targeted 8 to 20 units tend not to be significant corporations, but smaller operations. So we think that these targeted grants would most likely have a greater impact than they would with a larger developer or landlord that we feel may already have the means to do this without city help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's right. Oh, sorry. I was just going to add, I think within the sort of economic considerations question on that bullet point there's kind of a lot of minor questions fitting into that one bullet, and that's sort of one of them.
Okay.
That was a great one to bring up.
Committee Member Peterson? Yeah,
no, it's so great to see this and real stuff on paper about it. It seems like there's sort of two which should be merging efforts. One is finding tenants that truly are interested in moving that way, even if they don't really know how to do it. And then the other is building owners that have have a desire to do it and aren't just recalcitrant and only want to do something that gives a big, they get more money back than they put in. So you need a motivated landlord. So have you thought about how the process of winning that down, like, obviously you wouldn't want a landlord in a building where none of the, you want the tenants and the landlord being at the same location. Have you thought about that process and how that would be accomplished?
Yes, we certainly have. And I believe that part of the application process or something to be considered on the application when we decide to whom we'll award these grants is one of those components will be if they're, sorry for mincing my words here. we'll give greater consideration to grants to landlords who can prove that there's existing tenant demand. How they prove that, I think we will help use the focus groups to determine before we release this application. But if we have multiple interested parties apply that go beyond the number of properties identified for this pilot, I presume that staff will most likely award it to the property owners who can prove that these charges will really be used rather than being given out at random.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And I'll also add that one of our goals for these focus groups is to try to generate more demand as well, and to try to find those connections or foster them if possible.
Great, thank you.
Super exciting.
Do any of the other members of the committee have any comments or questions before we move on to the members of the public? All right, it looks like we have one hand raised.
Two hands.
Oh, great.
Big item. Jeremiah?
Hi, yeah. So hypothetically, let's say I own a 1-bedroom condo at 555 Pierce Street, and there's 1,000 units in my building, A, B, C, D, F, G, I don't know. But my little teeny tiny parking space, little teeny tiny parking space to where I can barely open my door. How are we going to do policies with old construction, right? How do we update this gigantic parking structure to where every single parking space is electric, has an option, right? Because we got to think long term with this electric thing. If our world is, outsourcing or getting rid of gas and we're doing 100% electric, well, in the 100 years from now, it's still going to be all electric. Every single parking space is going to need to have electric charger. Every space in Albany in 100 years from now is going to have an electric charging parking space. It's just inevitable. So I'm just wondering, old construction, new construction, and these parking requirements with the city, there's nothing. It's outrageous. A whole apartment building goes up with 30 units and no parking restrictions, no parking spaces required. It's where do people park? So I'm sorry, but everybody's going to have to be paying to park on Solano eventually, because every parking space on Solano is going to be electric charging space eventually. And whether it's not for the rich community or not, Albany is a wealthy community, and I think, electric charging places on Solano and every single place on San Pablo is great. So, so I just want to stay on topic to where, hypothetically at Pierce Street or these units at these old apartments, if I want an electric charging space, do I contact the HOA, and is the HOA going to charge me? There's going to be a lot of who's paying for this stuff. But if there's that government grant, because I've heard about it all over the news or wherever I've been hearing it, all this trillions or something dollars for transportation updates with the nation, railroads and infrastructure. And I think if we do this now and request as a city council now, we might get do it timed right to where all that new money coming in for infrastructure, it would pay for all these parking meters and electric chargers all throughout the city. It would be paid for with this $1 trillion thing. Okay, thanks.
David?
Yeah, I'm just gonna put my engineer hat on, and we bought an EV a couple of years ago, and it came with a level 1 charger, and they just don't get the job done. It takes forever. You kind of have to it's just, so I just would say, I would take the level 1 charging off the table. We need faster charging to be, practical for recharging, especially if you're going to have sharing of charging units within a building. Ideally, we could go with a supercharger so people could, plug in for an hour. And then just think about logistics of sharing charging stations. These apartments, I don't think it's economically feasible at the beginning of this kind of electrification for a landlord to come in and put a individual charging unit at every parking place. So hopefully there'll be some technology where you can put in one unit per 4 spaces. And when you pull in, you plug, you can have 4 cars plugged in, but then only one is charging at a time. But there's there's an automatic system that when that car is got it's charged up, it automatically rolls over to the next car and the next car. So you can be charging 4 cars overnight or 2 cars overnight. And people can be sleeping, and you don't have the logistical hassles of having to move cars around in the parking lot and coordinate with your neighbors to get charged. That's just kind of a technology thing to hopefully something like that is doable or will be doable, and that'll make it more cost effective for everybody and operationally. Less of a hassle. That's it.
I don't see any other hands raised at this time.
Great. Thank you all so much. And I believe apart from giving feedback, there's no other action required on that agenda item tonight. Is that correct?
That's correct. Not at this time.
I do see Eric with a hand raised, though. Committee Member Peterson. Or is
just another question. When do you expect that these focus groups are going to start?
Our intention is to begin outreach for the focus groups at the start of the new year, to ideally, hopefully be held in February or March.
Okay, great.
Committee Member Peterson.
So I have a couple comments. Just going back to how you vet the tenants and the landlords, I had some thoughts on that. I mean, of course, you wouldn't want to get a landlord, a bunch of tenants interested, and then find out the landlord had absolutely no interest in participating. So it kind of seems like the methodology should be to have the landlords help you, because they have kind of a legal ability to interact with the tenants if it has something to do with the property, which this would. So it seems like if you went through the landlords and found ones who were interested and would lobby for having a session, and then you could tell them if they're a 20-unit place, if you get at least 8 of your tenants to agree to come to the session. Anyway, I think you need to think through that strategy. You're going to, I get that you want to get a lot of information out to a lot of tenants, but as a pilot project, I think we want to have a really good match between the building and the tenants. So I think my recommendation would be going through the landlords first and getting them on board to help communicate with the tenants and find out what's going on. And certainly it's easier because per building, you only need to contact one individual or one entity rather than all the tenants in the building. And I think that'll make a much more successful project. The other thing is I wanted to comment back on what some of the, Jeremiah's comment about, I go to the Golden Gateway Center, the big high-rise towers on Albany Hill. I think there are 400 or 500 units there. They have a huge parking garage with tons of space and a lot of power panels all over the place. And I haven't gone through the whole garage, but I don't see any vehicle charging there. And we might think about doing an outreach to the homeowners association just to find out if maybe they've come up with a way of handling that, or maybe they would be encouraged to have a presentation about EVs well, they're not, I mean, if there are any tenants there, they're renting from a condo owner. It's really a condominium. It isn't an apartment building. But anyway, that sort of clicked in my head, and that's a huge place. So there's a potential pilot there that I think could be successful by going to one entity, which is the HOA. And then with David's comments, are you doing research on technology that manages sort of these additional loads? You know, the concern being panels won't be adequate, but if these are all running at midnight to 5 a.m, nobody's using anything. So if there's something that managed the panel loads, the charging could happen. I mean, some people will want to charge during the day. But anyway, how does the technology aspect work into the study? And then maybe a last thing is, it could be that there could be many tenants that live in these apartment buildings that are involved in ride hailing, you know, that they do Uber or Lyft. And we might want to find, I think both those entities are interested in getting their drivers over to electric vehicles. If someone works for Uber or Lyft and there's, you know, they're promoting, hey, get electric vehicle, we'll help you and we'll supplement it. And they're going, well, I live in an apartment building, I can't plug it in. There could be a good coalescing of incentives there to make that more feasible.
All right. I'm not seeing any more questions or comments, so thank you all so much. Thank you so much for all the work you've done on this. It's so exciting to see this all coming along. So
thank you guys, and the feedback is very helpful. Thank you.
The next item up on our agenda is item 6-3, the Electrification Rebate Program Proposal.
Yes, this one is me. Can you guys see my screen okay? Wonderful.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to be chatting today about a proposal for an electrification rebate program. Little background, I think you might remember that this concept has come up a few times in previous meetings. There's been some interest among several committee members to do some sort of electric appliance rebate program to try to increase, in particular, the large gas appliances in homes being converted to electric. So this is a proposal for exactly that. To give a little background on our current state of affairs, this chart here shows heat pumps versus gas furnace installations in the last few years. And as you can see, the orange heat pump section has been growing, well, really just in 2021 has grown significantly, from 5 in the 2 years before that to 15. So of course, small numbers here in Albany, but in terms of percentages, it's a 300% growth. So that's great news. I will note, however, that this is from our permit data, which is definitely limited. There are a lot of people that replace their HVAC systems without a permit. So we don't have any data on that. And it's probably pretty likely that most of those, if not all of them, are gas appliances. That's just easier to do without a permit, cheaper, all those things. So this isn't the full picture, but it does give us a sense. And of course, all this said, 15 is still not a ton. And we really want to minimize the installation of new gas appliances right now, while the market is sort of gearing up and it's becoming more common. We want to do everything we can to prevent those gas heaters from going in there where they'll last for 30 years. So that said, let's talk a little bit about the existing rebate programs that are currently operating in the area. The main one is BayREN. BayREN is an organization that has rebates for a whole variety of home improvement measures. There's $1,000 rebate for ductless heat pumps and ducted heat pumps in homes with AC. So it doesn't work for all homes, just some of the homes, depending on exactly what their system looks like. And there's also $2,000 available for heat pump water heaters right now, $1,000 to the homeowner and another $1,000 to the contractor. There's also a program called Tech, which has $1,000 rebate for heat pump water heaters. It works through the BayREN program. So effectively, BayREN will give you $3,000 for a heat pump water heater right now. And then there's also $300 for the water heaters available through PG&E. So as you can see here, there's a lot of focus on water heaters, but heat pump HVAC systems are really not seeing a huge amount of attention. There's sort of a gap there. And then this is a review of rebate programs that are run by cities. There are a few of these throughout California. And this chart shows kind of a sense of what they look like. Seeing, the amounts kind of vary between 500 and 2,000. And generally about $1,000 seems to be pretty effective. The $500 rebates are less popular. And of course, the size of the city and the length of the program make these numbers kind of all over the place. But the general idea it gets across is that these programs can be very effective. I spoke with several of the people that run them, and almost all of them, with the exception of Lompoc here that has had 0 applications, all the others said that these programs were working really well. They were seeing a huge increase in demand. And in particular, they were seeing a lot of people learning about the programs and about electrification through their contractors, which is great news. So it's sort of a proof of concept that this sort of thing can work on a city basis. So the proposal that we have tonight is really a rebate program that's focused on heat pumps. It'd be $1,000 rebate for a heat pump installation, and then another $1,000 rebate for an electrical panel upgrade when that goes along with a heat pump installation, if you need to update the panel in order to get your heat pump in. And then it would be $2,000 for both of those for very low income residents. So extra for those people. And then the last little bit is a $500 signing bonus for contractors that register with BayREN. So this entire program would be run by staff, and it would go along with our existing permit and inspection process. Basically, someone would fill out a short application, turn it in with their permit, and once they pass the regular inspection, they would receive a check from the city for the rebate amount. It wouldn't be part of BayREN. It would sort of, support BayREN, especially with the signing bonus. And people could get this rebate and also BayREN's rebate, but the two of them wouldn't be tied together. So just to explain a little bit more about the thinking behind this, as I said earlier, the heat pumps are really sort of a funding gap in the current programs. There's a lot of emphasis on water heaters right now, so we wanted to fill that gap. And electrical panels are also a major gap. There really aren't any rebates, at least in Albany right now, that support electrical panel upgrades. And we know that these are really a major cost barrier. Oftentimes, someone wants to electrify and they realize, oh, I need to, spend $3,000 on an electric panel upgrade. And then also we know that if you're able to upgrade that panel, that's going to support future electrification as well, not just the heat pump, but the water heater, the cooktop, all these things down the line that they can do. So that's the reasoning behind why we chose those two items. I put here the incremental cost. So heat pumps cost about $7,000 more than a gas furnace on average. So this $1,000 rebate would not be covering the entire cost there. But it would be creating that extra incentive that could be bounced up to $2,000 if they work with BayREN as well. And then, of course, we'd be working hard to try to inform people about all of the other non-cost related benefits of heat pumps too. And then, for the electrical panels, again, it's not covering the entire cost, but it's creating an incentive that helps make up some of that difference. And then the Bay Rent bonus, the thought here is that we really want to expand the current network.
Why?
The more that we're able to get contractors connected with Bay Rent, the more we can communicate with them, make sure that they're up to date on the newest resources and practices and climate goals. And it also helps expand access to rebates to more Albany residents, all of the other rebates that Bay Rent has. So really want to work in tandem with them as much as possible while keeping the program in-house. The benefits of this kind of rebate program is that, first of all, it's really simple, it's inexpensive. The cost to the city for managing it would be really small because, as I said, it fits into our current programming and what the permit staff is doing on a daily basis. And it has an immediate impact. We'd be able to, start funding more electrification very quickly. And then, of course, we're supporting the development of the heat pump market. So while it's still kind of in its nascent phase right now, it's just starting to grow. We want to boost that as much as possible so that a few years down the line, when we really need to electrify very quickly, it'll be easier to do that. And then finally, like I was saying, this is a great opportunity to do outreach, to educate people, both contractors and homeowners. It's, being able to put up big numbers like $1,000 rebate is a great way to get people in the door, to talk to them, and to explain to them what we're trying to do and why it benefits them and everyone else. The proposed budget for this program would be $25,000 per fiscal year, beginning in the upcoming fiscal year in the middle of next year. And it would be funded using Measure DD. And $25,000, it would cover up to 25 projects a year. It depends on exactly what those projects look like, if they have electrical panels or, very low income, et cetera. So it'd probably be a few less than that, but that would be the maximum it could cover. And that funding amount could be adjusted based on how popular the program is. If we see those funds are running out in the first few months, then more could be added. We could go back to council for that. Or reduce it if we see that we're not really using it up. So it's flexible, but this is kind of the starting point. And our recommendation is for the Climate Action Committee to recommend that the City Council authorize staff to create this program and utilize that $25,000 per fiscal year. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Before Michelle takes any questions, I will note that it's 8:57, which means your meeting technically concludes in 3 minutes. So I encourage you to make a motion to extend.
Thank you for watching the time, Lizzie. Would anybody like to make a motion to extend the meeting? This is, just a note, this is the last presentation on our agenda. Then we have subcommittee updates and future agenda items.
I'll make a motion to extend 30 minutes.
I second.
Could we get a vote, please, Lizzie?
Yes. Sorry, just to confirm, extend to 9:30 p.m.?
9:30 p.m.
Committee Member Breeding.
Yes.
Committee Member Fasoon.
Yes.
Committee Member Larson.
Yes.
Committee Member Peterson.
Yes.
Committee Member Mira Venkatesh.
Yes. Vice
Chair Merchant.
Yes.
Motion carries. Please continue.
Committee Member Larson.
Just a question about the number of projects and the total budget amount. I mean, I know what it's like going to council and asking for like allocation of money, but I mean, 1,000 was sort of like the lowest amount that would be used for any one project, right? So do you have an idea of what an average amount would be per project? Because it seems like it might be more like a couple thousand per project.
That's a great question. What I can say based on the permit data I've seen is that most of the heat pump projects we've had have not included electrical panel upgrades. I think out of the 15, it was like 4 or something that had the panel upgrades. And at the moment, I don't know for certain, but I don't think most of them are coming from very low income individuals, just based on other data. So based on what we're seeing right now, the average would probably be something like 13,000 per project or something. That could totally change though, just based on the incentive changes that we're making.
I was thinking about the rebate amount that the city's providing.
Yeah, that's what I mean. The rebate amount would maybe average around 13,000. So you'd get, it wouldn't be that amount. It's, for an individual project, but maybe one in every 3 projects would be a $2,000 project instead of 1,000, in rebate amount. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I just was thinking about pitching this to city council. I mean, 25 sounds like a good number of projects for cities, but if it turns out to be more like actually like 12 because each of them are $2,000, then we've kind of shortchanged the program. I'm just thinking maybe think about how you pitch this to city council, because it might be an opportunity to say we want to do 25 projects and they're an average of 1,500 each. Because 25 sounds like a good number of projects, and then you get $40,000.
Yeah, that's a great point. I would estimate that 25,000 would fund 20 projects, would be my guess.
Okay.
But it might be a little less, and it's possible that we might ask for more. If you guys would like to suggest asking for a larger budget, that's within your range.
I guess that's kind of what I was going for, was like, I know you got to be careful, like you ask for too much and the whole thing gets shut down. So, but it feels like shooting for 25 for the city size of Albany would be a good target for the first year. That seems achievable. So just make sure you ask for enough money to get 25 projects.
Committee Member Peterson?
Yeah, I agree with Eric. The other thing is we need to promote this very heavily, and especially with contractors who would love to get the business. And, to some degree, whether it goes to people who are fairly affluent or not, it's kind of irrelevant. Everybody needs to change. We want to incentivize them. Also, do we have any indication, Lizzie, of what the revenue coming in from the DD is? I mean, it was supposed to be about 200,000 a year. So far I don't think we even allotted, 80,000. I think we had 50 plus 25 plus 20 or something. So maybe we're getting close to 100,000, but this would be probably the major program initially, which should be funded so that it's very successful. And we want to show that success, and we want to do a lot of outreach and promote it. So I would think we want to get as many installs as possible, and fund it for as much as possible. If you don't reach that, it's better to get it funded well now and strive and maybe not meet that, rather than use it all up quickly and then do nothing for the rest of the time, or have to go back and ask city council again and put it on an agenda and take time. So I think we should think, again, in my thought of, really pushing this, is think big, have it be at least a $40,000 program, and try to get as much out there as possible. Really, there's an opportunity here too, with low-income homeowners, especially if they're elderly. They could be very vulnerable to heat issues and really want the air conditioning. And it might be, if they partnered with Rebuilding Together or something like that, some of the costs would be covered, and this would supplement that, and they would get the new unit. So maybe we could do outreach and help, really try to target people and help them and get this money out there and used to its biggest advantage.
It seems we're getting a little bit into discussion around this. So, and I see we have a member of the public with a hand raised. Are there any other committee members that have a question? Before, 2 hands raised now, before we move on to, so Committee Member Larson, if you have any, and then anybody else has a question, and then we'll move to the members of the public, and then we can go back and get into a discussion around it.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I love having an incentive for the contractors, and I know that Bayren has some training requirements. Do we have any requirements for the contractors? What's our criteria or requirements for contractors to participate?
The proposal as it stands would just be that they have that they've filed for a permit within the city within the last year or so. We could figure out exactly the number, and that they sign up for Bayren, that they are signing up as they get the incentive. That would be the only requirement. And then of course, part of signing up for Bayren would be completing all of those Bayren requirements to be a contractor.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions, so if we could turn it over to the two members of the public who have their hands raised, and then we can come back for a discussion.
Jeremiah?
Yeah, hi, good evening, committee. So this is such a wonderful thing. Obviously, that's a great idea to advertise it for contractors. I mean, that's just a great way to, incorporate it with the city. I'm looking forward to, applying for a $15,000 grant, I guess, because I would love to update, a resident or a multifamily home. Or does that go for anything in Albany? Does that go for a condo or an apartment or a single family or multifamily to upgrade? Because the water pump, the heat pump, is a great idea. The gas furnace, because the gas furnace is, if we have an earthquake, the gas furnaces just kind of leak gas and cause a fire. And it's just really hazardous when there's an earthquake. So yeah, just looking forward to it. Maybe, it's a good way to advertise it. The best way to advertise it is talk to KLB, Jeremy Allen. He did a test the other day on YouTube, and it was wonderful. So I think it'd be great to advertise on our television channel. Keep up the good work.
David?
Yeah, I agree with, go big or go home. So, if the council approves this program and some money, you'll certainly see me out knocking on doors with my neighbors, and I will deliver you 20 projects in short order. And if you think I'm excited about this opportunity, when my wife gets involved, she'll double my. So I think, we got to go big, at least, as big as possible. I know, money's hard to come by, but we got the DD money. But this is, I think, just like an ideal way to use it. And then, how are we going to market this and advertise it? I think we need to be aggressive through all different social media. I don't know if we can do a mailer or what. I don't know if the Solano Stroll's going to be back next year. I think it'd be nice to set up a table for this program. Anyhow, so just encourage, just some very aggressive, creative ways to advertise this. And then what else? The other thing was, about low income grants, which I think are great, but I've seen where people are low income, and like I've been low income for the last year because I retired, right? And so if you only look at income, if you look at my income and you go, oh gosh, gee, Dave, we're going to give you a big grant, but I've got a whole bunch of money sitting around in my 401ks or my IRAs, which doesn't generate income at the moment. It's just all sitting over there. So I'm a perfect example of somebody who should not, be taking advantage of a low income program. But my income would probably, depending on what you have for thresholds, I might qualify. So I don't know how you protect against that, but just something to think about. And that's it. I'm excited about this. This is great. Good work.
No other members of the public with their hand raised.
Now we can open it up for discussion.
I can also address, I think there are two questions in there if you'd like. Jeremiah asked about whether it'd be open to multifamilies and various types of housing. And the answer is yes. We haven't included any sort of limits on the type of building. So could be eligible for a restaurant or multifamily or single family, anything like that. And then as far as the question about income, I will note that the person I spoke to in Marin, who's running their program, said that they were having some issues with people who are low income technically, but just had a lot of savings, were retired, that sort of thing. And he said that they're switching their program to have that incentive for very low income, which is technically a different standard. And that's what I included here. It's for very low income. And it's in an attempt to protect against people who don't really have the need getting that extra incentive.
Committee Member Peterson?
Yeah, so I think we heard a member of the public saying they would personally promote this and get out there and get quite a few involved. I don't know if we hit as 20, but again, the idea being if we really promoted this more and there were more people applying for it, again, this sort of begs the question about going in. And I sort of expanded beyond my initial question, which was, do we have any idea of what our current level of DD funds that are available are coming in, sort of the rate they come in, and what we've obligated? Are we kind of monitoring that chunk of funds so that we can use it to its best advantage? I don't think we're coming up with anything more in the next month that we're going to put on request for as far as related to CAP. I know Preston Jordan put in the tree, free tree planting, and I don't know how much that's used. But again, we should have some way of tracking that. Or the question is, are we tracking that?
Yeah, I can say, so 50,000 for the pilot. And yeah, I think, I'm not sure exactly how much was set aside for the trees. Maybe Lizzie knows.
Don't remember.
I don't think it was a huge amount. And then the other program that's kind of being considered right now, this wasn't really discussed, but it was on the consent calendar in the last council meeting, is a proposal to prune gas pipelines. And so that's sort of still in very early stages, and the cost implications of that are very much unclear at the moment, but it could potentially be significant if the city does pursue it. But, in terms of when that would happen, that's also a larger question. Sort of the staggering and the timeline of it are all sort of being worked out right now.
Do we know what DD has garnered for the city?
I don't think we've received an update on that yet.
I think we're expecting one early next year.
Yeah.
Committee Member Larson?
I just wanted to say this is fantastic work. I really appreciate you doing this. This is awesome. This is exactly what we're, I think, as a committee, hoping to see, that ideas are coming up and coming to fruition. Do you need any support from the committee as far as a motion to support this program or anything like that to go to City Council?
Yeah, so our recommendation tonight, I can put it back up on the screen here, is for you all to recommend the City Council authorize staff to create the program. And then, we had this recommendation of 25,000. In your motion, if you choose to make one, you can also edit that to be a different amount if you want to, or you can stick with the amount we've put here. But that's the staff recommendation. That would be what we'd then bring it to the council with that recommendation from the CAC.
Yeah. I guess I mean, I don't want to jump ahead if there's any more discussion that we want to have. So that's maybe I'll wait for a minute.
I just wanted to chime in that the point that you made, Michelle, which I think is a really great one, is that the impact of this program is not just on the 20 or 25 people that receive the rebates, but in creating more of a culture and an awareness around these technologies. And so I think I just want to emphasize that that's going to be a really important part of the program, is using it to educate the community. Because when there's money attached to something, people pay attention more. And so just making sure that we give due weight to that. Committee Member Peterson?
Yeah, so I just did a quick calc, and you said that we had 15 installations like this. What time period was that over the last year?
That's the year to date.
This year to date, 15.
Yeah.
So I would think we should shoot to double that to 30 because this incentive program is so great. And if it was 1,300, that would come to just under 40,000. So my recommendation is we increase it to 40K.
Yeah, I'd second that. I mean, that's sort of the line of thinking that I was going with. I would definitely support this motion with an increase in the ask amount. Yeah, so 40,000 sounds good. That with the reasoning that would give us a better shot at getting 25 actual installations.
Would any of the other members of the committee like to give comment on the program before we move it to a vote? Committee Member Larson, could you restate that as a proposed motion if you'd like to make it? With the
I propose that the Climate Action Committee support the proposal with an increase of the funding up to $40,000.
I'll second.
Could we please get that, Lizzie? Thanks.
Committee Member Breeding?
Yes.
Committee Member Fasoon?
Yes.
Committee Member Larson?
Yes.
Committee Member Peterson?
Yes.
Committee Member Mira Venkatesh?
Yes.
Vice Chair Merchant?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thanks so much for all your work on that. And
Thanks,
then
everybody.
the next item is 6-4 subcommittee updates. So the first subcommittee update is from Committee Member Larson and me. Eric, would you like to give the update, or would you like me to?
Go ahead. You said it earlier. They did a nice job.
So Eric and I co-hosted a community forum in October. And our goal of the forum was to bring together community leaders to discuss engagement with the Carbon Free Albany platform. And we prepared a presentation. We had done a bunch of outreach ahead of time. And we were anticipating that we would have representative members of different groups within the community who would show up to engage with us around bringing Carbon Free Albany to their groups and sort of creating a program for driving more engagement with that platform. We ended up with a slightly different group of attendees, and we had a really great discussion around engagement with the platform, but a lot of the attendees were individuals instead of representative group members. And so in reflecting on how that presentation went and the forum went, what Eric and I concluded is that it's probably going to be more meaningful if Eric and I make ourselves available to representatives of individual groups in the community to offer support and technical assistance to help them bring Carbon Free Albany to their groups, as opposed to doing this as one large community ask where we're all trying to do it together in a tracked way. Instead, we're going to continue to do outreach to different groups within the community and try and partner with them so that they can hopefully launch initiatives around it. But after, just in the context of and Eric can add to this if he wants, in the context of that particular forum, we didn't get the sort of initial kind of level of engagement to feel like we had momentum with carrying it forward in that particular way. And so we've sort of revised our strategy and are going to do more targeted direct support. But we would love the feedback of the rest of the committee if y'all have additional thoughts on how we should approach this.
So I had a quick thought. So have you identified sort of the stakeholders in some of the representative communities that you want to engage with, or do you have any help on that?
We would love to engage with U Village, and we talked about that a little bit, UC Village. We'd love to, committee member Fasoon, if you would help us connect with the high school, that could be really meaningful. Eric and I have been talking with the owner of Feelgood, who has a really large network of customers on Solano. And so those are some of the ideas we had for groups that we continue to talk with around this.
All right. Yeah, no, I'm happy to help with, feel free to reach out to me afterwards, and I'm happy to help coordinate that conversation for UV.
Great.
But that was our original intent, was to contact community leaders or group leaders, or we contacted churches and Rotary and service groups and schools, and we just didn't get the draw-in that we expected. And so I think, like Laura said, we're happy to continue to engage with groups as they come to us, or that we can contact them. And if you can help us contact people, that'd be great. But to try to do some sort of community-wide challenge that generates the excitement that we were kind of trying to do, it just doesn't seem like it's going to gain traction.
Committee member Peterson?
Yeah, so I think you'd have good success. I think each elementary school has its own PTA. The middle school has a PT, and the high school has a PSTA, which includes students. So there, I would reach out to each one of those to try to engage them. I know Marin School PTA put on a really good climate event a little over a year ago that I went to, and had information about carbon-free Albany, but didn't really have an opportunity to speak to the whole group about it because there was someone else doing a big presentation. University Village is under the UC, which has its own program of implementing carbon reduction. So, and those are renters of UC housing in that. So I'm not sure how much we want to focus on them actually using the platform, because it's kind of a moot point. They don't have any, well, they can do some of the rental, I guess, person aspects, but not sure if that, I think it's more important to get basic homeowners and maybe other commercial rental people involved. Just a thought on that.
Can you remember soon?
Yeah, following along with that, is there space in the subcommittee for, I would like to get more involved, like officially join. Is there a space for that?
Yes, we'd love to have you on the subcommittee. We actually had lost a subcommittee member when committee member Woolley moved away. So
yeah, I would love to be a part of it.
Welcome. Absolutely. Eric, we'll send you an email after the meeting tonight. Thank you. All right, well, thank you all so much. That feedback was really helpful. Committee member Peterson, did you have another?
Well, I was just going to say it's great that committee member Fizen is participating. I think there's a big opportunity to have student participation, to sort of bring it to their homes and encourage it as a method to take personal action against climate change. So I applaud that. I think that's a great idea.
Great. Thank you. All right, and so the next one is the Multifamily EV Charging Pilot Subcommittee. I know we had received the presentation already on the pilot program, but does that subcommittee have an update?
I don't have anything. In fact, I don't think we've had a formal meeting. We've just been waiting to see what staff has been bringing about. So I have nothing. I don't know if the other members do.
Okay. Great. So then we can move on to the point of sale electrification mandate subcommittee. And this is the one that was formed after the presentation that we had at our last meeting, right?
Yes. And briefly, the committee should probably extend the meeting one more time.
Okay, this is our last subcommittee update. Then we'll just have future agenda items. So we could probably do a short extension. Do you think we could?
I'll put it for 15 minutes to, what is that, 9:45?
45, and hopefully we'll conclude before that.
Yeah.
Could we get a second, please?
I second.
Okay. Committee member Breeding,
Yes.
committee member Fasoon,
Yes.
committee member Larson,
Yes.
committee member Peterson,
Yes.
committee member Mira Venkatesh,
Yes.
vice chair Merchant.
Yes.
Motion carries.
So, Lizzie, did you want to, I could do a quick unless,
I'll defer
Mira-
to you and committee member Mira Venkatesh.
yeah, Mira Venkatesh, did you want to put anything forward? I mean, I could speak about briefly about what we are. I don't have notes in front of me.
Yeah, I can just give you a quick overview. So what we did so far is the three of us, so Lizzie, committee member Peterson, and I have sort of met and debriefed on what we think could be some of the plus points of the policy and what some existing outstanding questions are. And we've been in communication with North regarding, regarding sort of coordinating answers to, or coordinating a time to sort of receive answers to those questions. I mean, our largest concerns are perhaps with respect to just thinking through how the pilot will be implemented, what we're measuring and tracking, and what sort of the downstream process of, translating those pictures into like actionable items for homeowners could be. So a lot of it's still in the process of information gathering.
Yeah, and I'll just add is I think we set up gosh, I'm looking at my calendar. I can't remember the date, but I think sometime in December, we're meeting with North Lennox and asking them a lot of questions about the platform and how it'll be implemented and the costs involved, et cetera, and just get more of a, get our hands more around what he's aiming for and what the benefits to Albany would be. And then if it did, then we'll come back to this committee again. We'll probably meet once before then and come up with a proposal and then meet back with the committee. The idea being that it probably would need, in order to work, you'd implement it for what I call selling season. I mean, usually house sales, it happens year round, but it gets more frenetic in spring, summer, early fall. So sort of a 6-month time period there where we'd have to get buy-in from realtors that they would actually use the system. So, not that this is going to be way down the line. We'd actually probably have to move pretty quickly in January, February, if we really wanted to have something that we would implement this year. That's my thoughts.
Well, thank you all so much for taking this on. I look forward to continued updates as you explore it. I don't see any more anybody else with their hand raised on the committee. So is it time to move on to future agenda items? Is that the last?
Comment this item.
A public comment. Would any members of the public like to comment on any of the subcommittee updates? We'll give them a minute here.
Don't see any hands raised.
So now we can move on to item number 7, future agenda items. I had noted that we would try to flag as an agenda item getting the EBC data on how many people are opting out of the energy option that we'll be adopting. That's the one I have. Any other? Committee member Peterson?
Yeah, I kind of like to bring back the tree. I mean, we have this third action we're doing. We're doing really great on the first two as far as electrification and zero emission transportation. We have pilot projects going on both, and actually a program going on one. But with tree planting, part of it is because Councilmember Jordan did sort of jump in and just said, let's use DD to make tree requests free. And that went through, but that wasn't really a tree management plan. And it wasn't really, I mean, hopefully it'll make more trees, but it doesn't seem to carry through on our third pillar, which was, for sequestration and adaptability of having more good shading street trees in Albany. So I wonder if we can put that back on the agenda and see if there's any interest in, what's the next step. It may be as simple as just developing a program to promote the free street tree and getting posters out or something, or just publicizing that more. Again, I might point out this would be a great opportunity if we had a very well-developed block captain network in the city. We could notify all the block captains that, hey, take a look around at your block. If you want more street trees, get people interested, talk to your neighbors, and it would go out to, hundreds of people. So again, there's that interconnection between those two efforts. But anyway, main thing was just that we used to have a subcommittee for it. I don't know if there's any interest. I'd be interested to hear what other committee members think.
I'll quickly jump in for both points. At the staff level, we're preparing to kick off the tree plan planning process in early 2022. Johnny, as a part of his Civic Spark service year, will actually be in charge of the outreach and engagement piece of that planning process. And as a part of that, he has also been working on further outreach to encourage the new waived application for street tree plantings. Johnny, I'll defer to you, but I have a feeling we won't have a huge update for this committee in December. Just seeing our current projects that are ongoing, and then I'll speak candidly with the committee. We typically get started on next steps from what happens at CAC meetings the week after the CAC meeting, and next week is a holiday week, and so we won't have many days, and then it's the first week of December, and then the Monday after the agenda is set. So I want to be sensitive to signing up a bunch of presentations for the December agenda, but definitely in January and February, I think we can do a robust presentation on the proposed next steps. That's
great to hear. So I think you kind of answered my question. It'll come up once staff has a little bit more to report on.
Yeah, if we were to bring a presentation before January, it would just be what I just said, but with a PowerPoint. So let's save that.
No, that's fine. I mean, I wasn't aware that was going on. So that sounds great. Thank you.
Cool.
Any other proposals for future agenda items? Do we open up this to members of the public as well? All right, This is a chance for any members of the public to propose future agenda items. I don't see any hands raised. So that brings us to item 8, which is just announcing that our next meeting is on December 15th at 7 p.m. And that concludes our meeting tonight.